The highway stretched endlessly beneath a canvas of stars, with only the hum of the engine and the occasional hiss of the wind breaking the silence. For Tom, a long-haul trucker with over a decade on the road, this was home. He had seen it all: rural towns sleeping under the weight of night, restless highways echoing with the whispers of past travelers, and the ghostly figures of hitchhikers that seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was a crisp autumn evening when Tom picked up a load in Chicago, destined for a small town in Maine. He had made the drive many times before, and despite the weight of the cargo, he felt a familiar thrill rush through him. The thrill of the open road was intoxicating, a reminder of freedom and solitude. As he hit the highway, the moon hung low, casting eerie shadows over the cracked asphalt. He flipped on the radio, tuning into an old country station, the comforting twang grounding him amidst the isolation. The first few hours passed without incident. He stopped at a diner for a late-night meal, greeted by the waitress with tired eyes who barely smiled. The place was empty, save for a couple of truckers hunched over their plates, eyes glazed and distant. "Be careful out there," one of them warned as Tom paid his bill. "Heard about some weird stuff happening on Route 29. People vanishing, strange lights in the woods," Tom chuckled, brushing it off. "It's just the stories we tell to keep ourselves awake. I'll be fine." Back on the road, the darkness deepened, and the trees loomed ominously on either side of the highway. The chill in the air seeped through the truck's windows, and Tom felt a slight unease creeping into his thoughts. He attributed it to fatigue, rubbing his eyes as he drove. Hours later, fatigue turned to dread. The radio crackled, and the familiar country tunes faded into static. Just then, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye, a figure standing at the edge of the road. It was a woman, her dress tattered and dirty, her hair hanging wildly around her face. Tom's heart raced. He slowed down, unsure whether to stop or drive on. As he approached, he could see the woman's face, pale and gaunt, eyes wide and unblinking. She raised a hand as if begging for help. Against his better judgment, he pulled over. "Need a ride?" he called out, his voice steady despite his nerves. The woman nodded slowly, her movements stiff. Tom's instinct screamed at him to drive away, but something in her gaze compelled him to wait. She climbed into the passenger seat, her presence chilling the air even further. "Where are you headed?" he asked, trying to make conversation. "Anywhere," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Just away, Tom felt the unease deepen but forced himself to remain calm. "You okay?" "You look like you've been through a lot," lost, she replied, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting something to leap from the darkness. "He's looking for me." "Who's looking for you?" Tom asked, his voice tightening. "The man in the woods. He takes people. He's not human." As the words left her lips, the temperature in the truck dropped even further. Tom could see his breath clouding in front of him, and a wave of nausea hit him. "We can get you to a hospital if you need help," he offered, desperate to shake the growing sense of dread. "No," she snapped, her voice sharp and wild. "He'll find me. You have to keep driving." Tom's grip tightened on the steering wheel, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as he pushed the accelerator. The road ahead felt endless, but he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching him from the darkness. The woman fell silent, her gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, a look of sheer terror plastered across her face. "What is it? What do you see?" Tom asked, heart pounding. "Please, drive faster," she begged, her voice breaking. "He's coming." Suddenly, the lights of the truck flickered, and the engine sputtered. Tom's stomach dropped. "Come on, not now," he wrestled with the wheel as the truck began to lose power, the engine gasping like a dying animal. "Pull over," she screamed, her hands clutching the dashboard. "Why?" "I can't," Tom shouted back, panic rising in his chest. Then he saw a figure emerging from the tree line, moving with unnatural speed. It was a man, tall and impossibly thin, his features obscured by shadow. Tom could feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent as it approached. "Pull over," she screamed again, her voice a mix of fear and urgency. Against his better judgment, Tom swerved to the side of the road, the truck grinding to a halt. The woman was out of the truck in an instant, stumbling into the darkness. "Run," she shouted, her voice echoing through the night. Tom's heart raced as he followed her, abandoning the safety of the truck. They ran together into the woods, branches scratching at their skin, the darkness wrapping around them like a shroud. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, growing closer with each passing second. "Keep moving," the woman cried, her breath ragged. "What's chasing us?" Tom gasped, glancing back. The figure was almost upon them, eyes glowing like embers in the dark. "He wants me. He wants to take you too," she screamed. Tom felt a chill grip his heart. He was trapped in a nightmare, running for his life with a woman he barely knew. They stumbled deeper into the woods, the underbrush thickening around them. Just when it felt like all hope was lost, they reached a clearing. The moonlight spilled over them, illuminating a dilapidated cabin. "Inside," she shouted, and they rushed through the door, slamming it shut behind them. The cabin was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of rot. Tom fumbled for something to defend themselves with, his hands trembling as he grabbed a rusted axe that lay forgotten in the corner. "What now?" he asked, eyes darting toward the door. "We wait," she replied, her voice trembling. They stood in silence, straining to hear any sound from the outside. The only noise was their ragged breathing, the darkness creeping around them like an unwelcome visitor. Tom glanced at the woman, who seemed lost in thought, her expression distant. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, hoping to ease her panic. "No," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "He's always there. I thought I could escape, but he never lets go." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, followed by the sound of something scraping against the cabin walls. Tom's heart raced as he stepped toward the window, trying to peer through the grime. "Don't look," she warned, grabbing his arm. "It will know you're here." He pulled away, feeling a strange compulsion to see. As he looked outside, the figure stood just beyond the tree line, its body twisted and unnatural. It seemed to shift in the shadows, an entity that defied the laws of nature. "Stay away from the windows," she cried, her voice frantic. Tom stepped back, trying to shake off the horror he felt. "What do? We need to find a way to distract it. It feeds off fear. It wants us to panic," Tom said, feeling the weight of dread settle in his chest. "How can we not panic? Remember why you're here. Why you keep driving," she urged, her eyes locking onto his. "You have to fight it. Don't let it win." Gathering his courage, Tom took a deep breath. He needed to remain calm. "All right. I can do this," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Good. Now find something to make noise," she instructed. "It's drawn to sound." Tom searched the cabin, rummaging through the clutter until he found an old metal pot. He grabbed a wooden spoon and started banging it against the pot, the sound echoing through the small space. The noise rang out into the night, and he could feel the darkness shifting outside, the figure hesitating as it registered the sound. "Keep going," she urged, her eyes wide. With every bang of the pot, the figure recoiled, but Tom could see it growing agitated. It howled, a sound that sent chills down his spine, resonating with a primal rage. He continued to hit the pot, heart racing as he felt the presence of the figure drawing closer again. Suddenly, the door rattled, and a loud crash echoed as it burst open. Tom swung around, axe raised, but the woman shouted, "No, don't fight it. It will only make it worse." As the figure entered the cabin, it was like stepping into another realm. The air grew thick and heavy, the shadows contorting into grotesque shapes. Tom could feel it pulling at him, like a dark mist wrapping around his mind. "Stay with me," she shouted, stepping in front of him. "I can't," he gasped, struggling against the sensation. "Remember who you are." "Focus," she yelled, her voice breaking through the fog that threatened to consume him. Tom closed his eyes, trying to recall his reasons for driving all those miles. The open road, the thrill of adventure, the people he'd met along the way. He remembered the camaraderie with fellow truckers, the laughter shared over late-night meals, the beauty of the world outside his truck's windows. With a surge of strength, he opened his eyes and brought the pot crashing down harder than ever. "Get out," he shouted, his voice booming through the cabin. The figure hesitated, its form flickering as if it were struggling against an unseen force. Tom felt the grip of darkness loosen, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. The woman stepped forward, standing beside him, her presence grounding him. Together, she cried. They both struck the pot, the sound ringing out, resonating with defiance. The figure let out a bone-chilling shriek, the sound reverberating through the cabin and into the woods beyond. With each strike, the darkness began to recede, the figure shrinking back into the shadows. Suddenly, with one last desperate blow, Tom slammed the pot against the ground, and the figure dissolved into a mist, dissipating into the night. Breathless, Tom and the woman stood in the cabin, the air now calm. Did we? Did we do it, he asked, still clutching the axe. Yes, she whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. We did. As dawn broke, the first light of morning crept through the cabin windows, illuminating the space with a warm glow. They stepped outside, feeling the weight of the night lift as the sun rose on the horizon. Thank you, she said, her voice soft. What now? Tom asked, still trying to process what had just happened. I can go back now. I'll find my way home, she replied, a newfound determination in her eyes. Tom nodded, watching as she began to walk back toward the road. He felt a mixture of relief and sadness as she disappeared into the morning mist, the echoes of the night fading into memory. He climbed back into his truck, starting the engine with a newfound appreciation for the open road. The highway stretched ahead, a winding path filled with the promise of new adventures, and as he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had escaped something truly terrible. The sun rose higher, illuminating the road as he navigated the twists and turns, determined to keep moving forward. But he knew one thing for certain: the darkness would always be waiting, lurking just out of sight, ready to claim those who strayed too close. As he drove, the radio crackled back to life, the familiar country tunes filling the cab. For now, he was safe, but he would never forget the woman in the woods and the horrors that had unfolded on that silent road. Every trucker knows the road can be a lonely and unforgiving place, but some highways are darker than others. Route 66, often romanticized in songs and stories, hides its own share of nightmares. Among truckers, the story of the shadow hitcher sends shivers down the spines of even the most experienced drivers. What happened to Marty Harlan one foggy night has been whispered at truck stops for years. Marty was a long-haul driver with decades of experience. He scoffed at ghost stories, dismissing them as hogwash for city folks. But his skepticism was shattered one cold November night as he hauled a load through Arizona. The day had been uneventful, with vast skies and endless stretches of desert. By nightfall, a thick fog rolled in, consuming the road ahead. Marty's GPS malfunctioned, and his CB radio had been eerily silent for hours. The isolation felt suffocating. Around 11:30 p.m. he noticed a figure standing on the shoulder. It was barely visible in the haze, but the silhouette of a man became clearer as he approached. The figure wore a wide-brimmed hat and tattered clothes. As Marty drew closer, he instinctively slowed. The man raised his hand for a ride, but something was off. His head tilted unnaturally, as if his neck were broken. Marty felt a chill creep up his spine. He wasn't one to pick up hitchhikers, but he couldn't just leave the guy there, not in this weather. Against his better judgment, he stopped. The man climbed into the passenger seat without a word. Up close, he looked worse. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes seemed too dark, like twin voids. "Thanks for stopping," the man said in a raspy voice that didn't match his appearance. Marty forced a nod, gripping the wheel. "Where you headed?" The man smiled faintly, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down Marty's spine. "Just down the road," he said cryptically. For several miles, the hitchhiker didn't speak, and Marty's unease grew. The cab felt colder, and an unnatural silence filled the air, broken only by the hum of the engine. Marty noticed the man wasn't casting a shadow in the faint glow of the dashboard lights. Trying to steady his nerves, Marty glanced over, but the seat was empty. He slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding as the truck skidded to a halt. The passenger door was locked, and the man was gone. Marty sat there, breathing heavily, convincing himself it had been his imagination. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement in the side mirror. The hitchhiker stood on the roadside again, grinning. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes, but his smile was unmistakable. Marty floored the accelerator, desperate to put distance between himself and the apparition. His hands trembled on the wheel, and his eyes darted between the road and the mirrors. He didn't stop until he saw the glowing lights of a diner ahead. He pulled into the lot, his rig screeching to a halt. Stumbling inside, Marty scanned the room for anyone he could talk to. The diner was nearly empty, save for a waitress and an older man nursing a cup of coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the man said, eyeing Marty. Marty nodded, struggling to find the words. He recounted what had happened, his voice shaking. When he finished, the man's face turned grim. "You picked up the shadow hitcher," the old-timer said, his voice low. "They say he's the spirit of a drifter killed on this highway years ago. Truck ran him over in the fog, never stopped. He's been haunting drivers ever since, looking for revenge or someone to keep him company. Marty laughed nervously, but the man didn't smile. You're lucky. Some say he never lets his passengers go. Marty didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the diner until dawn, drinking cup after cup of coffee, too shaken to get back in his truck. When the sun rose, he reluctantly climbed into his cab, vowing to avoid Route 66 at night. But the shadow hitcher wasn't finished with him. A week later, while driving through another stretch of highway, Marty's CB crackled to life. Through the static, a familiar raspy voice whispered, "Thanks for the ride." Marty slammed the CB off, his hands shaking. He never drove alone at night again, but no matter how far he traveled or what routes he took, he always felt a presence watching him from the passenger seat. Years later, Marty retired, but he couldn't shake the memories of that night. Truck stops still buzz with his story, and those who've driven Route 66 swear the shadow hitcher is more than just a tale. If you're ever hauling freight through the fog, keep an eye on the roadside, and whatever you do, don't stop.